We talk a lot about freedom. It's supposed to be the thing we all want more of. Who doesn't want fewer restrictions and complete control over our lives? But whenever I read philosophers on freedom, I notice something strange. They don't treat it as an uncomplicated good. In fact, some of them thought freedom might be unbearable, even dangerous, that we would rather do everything in our power to escape it. And I find that paradox fascinating because it reveals something not just about philosophy, but about why we sometimes long for someone else to tell us what to do, that we, in fact, long for authority. Now, the idea that you desperately want to escape freedom might sound absurd. It surely doesn't feel that way when you strive for liberation from your 9 to 5 corporate job. But Camus introduces us to this disturbing possibility in a compelling narrative in his novel, The Fall. I won't talk about it in much detail, partly because I discussed it in another video, and partly because I hope that you would pick it up and enjoy it for yourself. To understand this idea, we must first understand the setup in which we encounter it. We find ourselves in Amsterdam in a dimly lit bar and a stranger who won't stop talking. That stranger is our protagonist, Clémence, though to call him a protagonist would be to unjustly suggest that he bears qualities of bravery and integrity, which, as we shall soon discover, couldn't be more unfair to his true disposition. In a book-long monologue, he recounts the events of his life that marked his downfall from a well-respected Parisian lawyer to now confessing his moral failures to anyone who would listen. He tells you of the pride he took in defending noble causes, his skill in turning a courtroom into a theater stage, and the delight he took in everyone applauding him. It was a trivial moment in traffic, really, that opened his eyes to an unbearable reality, that people were secretly judging him behind all those smiles and handshakes. As his monologue continues, he confesses to his own duplicity, how he exploited people for the admiration and power he gets from doing so, his cowardice, his vanity. He even goes to call himself an enlightened supporter of slavery. He admits that in earlier times he was so unbelievably naive that he worshipped the word freedom and oozed of it at every occasion in the day. As he put it, he would exude a breath that was delightfully freedom fresh. That is, until he came to realize that freedom was not a gift at all. It was a punishment, that you and you alone are responsible for the consequences of the choices you make in light of that freedom. At the end of the day, you are left with nothing but judgment from yourself and from others, and you stand in it all alone. As Clémence put it, alone in the dock before the judges and alone to make up your mind, before yourself and before the judgment of others. At the end of every freedom, there is a sentence. If you recognize neither God nor master to make a plan for you, you are crushed by the weight of freedom. And so people end up choosing a master anyway. If not God, then ideology. If not ideology, then institutions. If not that, then politics, even fashion. Anything to shift the burden of those choices elsewhere. Even when you break free from whatever is binding you, be it your job, your university, a human being, you submit to something else. We let anything from technology, ideology to politics choose for us. Even our personality is borrowed. Clémence notes, you have to be methodical when you have no character. There are people who would much rather cling to method and order to decide for them how to act, instead of choosing for themselves out of character and conviction. In a way, Camus is suggesting that authority isn't even imposed on us. It is something that we actively seek, because it lightens the awful solitude of being free. Even when authority is cruel to us, at least we don't have to stand alone in judgment. At least it binds us to obey it together. That's why, to Clémence, we seek those masters, deliciously strict masters. And note how he justifies this shift. He calls submission the comforts of slavery, as if selling it as the true freedom. We see it everywhere in the modern world. Consumerism promising liberation through endless choice, when in practice it enslaves us to endless desire and dissatisfaction. The supposed freedom of social media, where we can express our thoughts and choose freely, when in reality we are bound to algorithms that shape our thoughts and worldview. These are forms of slavery sold to us under the guise of freedom. Now, Camus, through Clémence, is hinting at our readiness to surrender freedom for the sake of comfort. But existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre, who wrote at around the same time, refuses to let us off the hook so easily, because for Sartre there is no real escape. He famously said that man is condemned to be free. We did not choose to exist, yet the moment we are thrown into the world, we are responsible for everything we do. We cannot not be free because to him, there isn't anything that compels us to act in a certain way. There is no divine power that dictates our actions. There is no human nature we can blame for our inclinations. To him, we are not born cowards or heroes. We make ourselves so in our actions. There isn't even any authority other than the one we choose to submit to. The act of submission in itself is a free choice. Even if you refuse to make a choice, that by itself is an act of choosing. But the thing is, when you are choosing, the very structure of choice demands that you choose the best available option. To choose between this or that is to affirm the value of what's being chosen. You simply cannot choose the worst. According to Sartre, every choice carries a hidden arrogance. This, not that. This is the way life ought to be lived. Now, this makes me think about how when someone proposes a viewpoint contrary to ours, our instinct is almost like we feel personally affronted, and our reaction can sometimes be almost emotional to that seemingly innocent intellectual challenge. Perhaps it confronts us with the possibility that we did not make the best choice after all when we landed on our strongly held beliefs, and that can feel strangely disorientating and unbearable. But the thing is, for Sartre, the mere act of choosing carries a much deeper meaning. There is almost an existential weight to it, because in choosing, we don't shape only our own life, but that of mankind. In his words, to legislate for all mankind. Now, this point may not be very intuitive, and it took me a moment to wrap my head around it. It certainly doesn't feel like you're choosing for mankind when you pick up sushi for lunch. But in my understanding, suppose you betray a friend. You may think of it as one bad, isolated incident. But in that act, you have already declared betrayal to be within the realm of human possibilities. You have shown that this, for you, is a way a person may live. And because nothing external imposes values outside yourself, your action is not one private gesture among many. It is an exemplification of what human behavior could be. You have put forward through your behavior the thesis that betrayal belongs within the realm of human possibility. And to Sartre, it is that implicit knowledge of the weight your choice carries that creates a deep sense of anguish, when you realize your decisions are not only for you. I had to think of examples from my own life to relate to anguish in that sense. One that came to mind is my YouTube channel. Every time I'm making a video, I do feel something that I cannot better describe than a sense of anguish. If you are a content creator, perhaps you felt it too. I have the freedom to choose what topics to talk about and what views to present to the world. And in that, I am showing what it means to engage with the world in this way. And that weight can sometimes feel paralyzing. Wouldn't it be easier if someone were to hand me a rulebook about what content to make so I could relieve myself from making the decision and blame them instead? The temptation, of course, is to escape this weight, to say, I couldn't help it, my temperament made me this way, or circumstances left me with no better option. Sartre called this self-deception and bad faith. It is merely a lie we tell ourselves to escape responsibility. And those who insist that everything is predetermined to let themselves off the hook are cowards. His words, not mine. But even cowardice is a choice. The coward makes himself cowardly through cowardly acts, just as the so-called hero fashions himself through acts of courage. Perhaps this ties to Camus' idea about innocence, how we so desperately want to be seen innocent and inherently good more than anything else, that we deserve to be excused. To tell a criminal that it is his circumstances that made him this way is far more desirable to them than to suggest that their nature is corrupted. That if circumstances were different, our actions would surely be nothing short of heroic. So if we accept that everything is driven by fate, genetics, or whatever it may be, then responsibility shifts elsewhere. But to Camus, we are all guilty. There are no excuses. Now, because there is no external framework that could carry the burden of our choices for us, freedom carries with it a sense of abandonment. Sartre illustrates this with the case of a student who once came to him during the war. The young man was torn between two obligations. On the one hand, to stay with his mother, who depended on him entirely, on the other, to leave for England to avenge his brother, whom he lost in the war, and join the Free French forces to fight the Germans. Both duties felt pressing and morally weighty, and no doctrine could decide for him, possibly. The point, Sartre argues, is that no rule could relieve the student of the burden. He must choose. Even going to a priest or to Sartre himself was already a choice, since he had to decide the kind of advice he was about to receive. The realization that we are alone in our decisions, that nothing outside us can absolve the responsibility, can feel like abandonment. When freedom comes with abandonment and anguish, it is no wonder that we so eagerly reject it and instead cling to our societal structures and corporate ladders and whatever rule books we could find. But instead of seeing it as an inescapable weight that leads to despair, Sartre rather declares it should lead to pure optimism, because at any moment it is within the person's power to redefine themselves. So it seems that the most dangerous idea about freedom is not that we don't have enough of it, but that we have too much that we spend our lives desperately searching for someone, anyone, to take it away. If you want to see more insights from Camus about human nature, you might enjoy this next video.